So the question here is whether working with complex trauma, whether adding on additional sessions in the week would be helpful. And I would say, well, maybe it will, and maybe it won't. And for anything that we do, there might be an equal and opposite reaction. So that the risks are that the client becomes dependent on 2 sessions a week, and maybe you don't have the capacity for that. But I think if we start from scratch, who said that once a week is the right way to do it? It's like, where did we come up with that? It's because it just fits into a rhythm. But there's nothing intrinsically therapeutic about it being once a week. The same way there's nothing intrinsically therapeutic about it being 50 minutes or 60 minutes. That's the way that it is developed largely. Some commentators would say to fit insurance billing in the States. It fits into the rhythms of our day, that our calendars are based on our slots. So we recognise that there's a way that the world works, the Western world works, that works generally for us, and it works for maybe rooms that you're booking and things that you're organising. But there's nothing intrinsically therapeutic. It's not a magic number, isn't 50 or 60 minutes, and once a week isn't a magic number. So let's start with just kind of saying, okay, it might be that works best for you and for the client, but be curious about whether it does. So for some clients, it might work better once a fortnight, maybe if they're traveling a distance, maybe if they have work commitments, maybe if they work shifts, all sorts of reasons why it might be more convenient to work once a fortnight. And yet we don't worry about working once a fortnight as much as we worry at working twice a week. And so there's an implicit bias that we have in there that we shouldn't give too much, that these clients need too much. And if you give them too much, then what'll happen? And this reminds me of the sort of the child rearing practices or the approaches, from a few decades ago, whereas if a baby cries and you pick it up, you'll spoil it. So don't pick it up, don't give it too much attention. And I think it's coming from the same basis at an emotional level. So I'm saying there's logical, rational, logistical reasons why we might want to go for 50 minutes, 60 minutes once a week. But at an emotional level, I think we shame clients fundamentally by saying you shouldn't really want more than an hour a week. And yet it's massive trauma that we're dealing with here. And so that's my starting point. Not that you necessarily give more than once a week for an hour, but that there's no shame in the client saying, well, can I have more? And I think that's something to explore, is what that's like for the client to ask for more, because that in itself might be a huge therapeutic breakthrough for them. Now, having said all of that, I think what works for each therapeutic dyad is different. So what worked for me won't necessarily work for other people, but I'll just give you some kind of basic principles that worked for me. I very rarely had more than one session a week. Sometimes I didn't feel like I'd get through 7 days without another session, but mostly I just worked once a week. But I almost always had longer sessions. And the analogy that comes to mind there is a conversation I was having with my neighbours the other day, with them watering their plants every single day, and me just letting Manchester rain deal with it, or watering them once a week in warm weather. Now, if you water every day, then the moisture only penetrates so deep, and so the roots actually only penetrate so deep. Whereas if you water deeply and for a long period of time, once a week, then the moisture goes further down, and the roots are encouraged to grow further down. And that's how I experienced therapy. That I didn't want frequent short sessions because I'd never go there with the deep stuff, but I did want a long session where I could go deeply. And I would have preferred personally, again I'm saying this is personally, I would have preferred fortnightly longer sessions if I had to, compared to frequent short sessions. But ultimately the question is, at this point in the client's journey, what is the problem that you're trying to solve by giving them an extra session or by them requesting an extra session? And so it's not a case of just whether you do or you don't. It's like, well, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and are there other ways to solve it? Because it might be that that's in the client's best interests to give them 2 sessions a week. But unless we know what the problem is that we're solving, we don't know. If it's all on the therapist to give more, then the risk, as we're sort of implying here, is that we're encouraging a dependency, and we're encouraging, we'll do it all for you, but you don't have to do any more yourself. Very rarely, but if I had 2 sessions, that was planned in order to do a particular piece of work. So for example, it might be before a therapist break, and we were finishing off a particular piece of work, and we really needed to get a couple of sessions in order to be able to kind of bracket it before she went away, if it was going away for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something. And I was exhausted then by it. And there was very little processing for me that went on in between the 2 sessions, if they're 3, even 4 days apart. And that to me is the danger of 2 sessions a week, is that the emphasis comes on what the client does with the therapist, but it doesn't, it's not balanced by what the client is doing for themselves in between the sessions to build up, to reinforce, to consolidate, to put into practice what's gone on. But that doesn't mean to say that you should never do 2 sessions, but I think as a general rule, it's how much work are you doing in between. But that's also depending on how your, the client's lifestyle, and are they working full time? Are they not working? And are they engaging? I mean, if they're sitting and they're journaling and they're really engaging with stuff, then you really can make that work with a 3-4 day gap. But similarly, if a client is having a weekly session, but they're not doing any work in between themselves, it's not really making the most of the sessions then, because we're not thinking through what went on in that session. We're not planning for the session to come. So everybody will have these different levels. So when I very rarely had 2 sessions a week, it was never for crisis. It was always in order to do a piece of work where there was a kind of just a kind of a time element on it. Because for me personally, not for everybody, but for me personally, I couldn't make the most of the session I'd had if there was another one coming up. And I think that attachment cry, that you look forward to the session and also dread it, and you're in a state of heightened amber zone, anticipation, dread, fear of what you're going to talk about, of being in the room again. You also want to be there. There's that attachment pull. And then you come down from that, and then it's like, oh, I'm now abandoned, I'm on my own, I have all of this to deal with. If then a couple of days later you're back into that cycle, I don't think emotionally you ever get to settle. So given that the work of recovering from trauma isn't just what we do in the therapy, it's the changes in our neurobiology, we actually need that time to make those changes. So again, another analogy would be doing sort of weight training at the gym, that from the little I know of it, if you go every single day, your muscles aren't getting the rest, and they're not able to then grow from the damage you've caused through the weight training. They need some rest. That actually it's the rest period where your muscles grow. So you can overtrain by going too often. And that's how I saw it sort of in my kind of emotional muscles. It's like, I need a break from this therapist. I need a break from this trauma. I need a break from doing this. And I actually need to go and put some things into practice. And I think the dependence comes where we see the therapy and the therapist as the only thing that's making a difference in our lives. That if I can just have another session, I'll be okay, because it can be incredibly re-regulating and incredibly helpful. There's no doubt about that. And so naturally our brain says, what can I do? I'm dysregulated. What can I do? Who helps? It's the therapist that helps. Let's have another session. And as we said there, it's perfectly okay for a while for that to happen. I'd always do that in a contracted way, to say for the next 2 weeks, for the next 4 weeks, for the next half term, but to put an end point on it, we will increase it while you're going through this particularly difficult patch. But also I'd put an expectation on it and this is what we are looking to achieve by doing it. We're not just going to double the dysregulation by going there to difficult places and leaving you in a worse and worse state each time. If you need 2 sessions because you're dysregulated, the focus of our work is going to be re-regulation during those sessions. And so it's got to be a deeper level of work. It can't just be shallow watering, but it has to be a deeper level of work than just tell me how awful things have been for the last 3 days and let me empathise with that. It's got to be productive work of, okay, you're very dysregulated at the moment. What can we be doing to help you? What can you be doing to help yourself to reduce this dysregulation? What's going on in your life generally? What's going on in your family? What's going on in your work? What's going on in your housing? What's going on in your finances? What is causing this hike of dysregulation? That's what we will use the extra time to work on, rather than just giving you an anaesthetic shot in the arm for it. Because otherwise, if you get an anaesthetic shot in the arm and you get that pain relief, you're going to become addicted to that pain relief. You're not going to solve the pain. So it's that way of looking at dysregulation that is it actually a problem? And it's a problem if someone's going to go into suicide and so on as a result of it. But the dysregulation and the pain and the distress of trauma is there to tell us that something's wrong and that we need to work on it. So sometimes if we give that anaesthetic, it actually works against the client in that they don't work on the stuff they need to work on. They just work on getting more anaesthetic shots. So it's allowing pain to do its work, which is to motivate us to change. But it's holding that very fine balance, because you can't say it in those words without coming across, especially to someone that's dysregulated, as being very discompassionate. So I'm not talking about saying anything like this. I'm talking about understanding the context of why do we want a second session? Perfectly reasonable for you to ask. Well done for asking. What is it that we'll be achieving by doing that? Are there other ways to achieve that? Are there downsides by us having a second session? What would be the unintended consequences? Let's look at all of those things and weigh them up. And for me, working with a therapist in a very collaborative way like that, to say, yeah, let's consider it. You can bring any request to therapy, and I won't just give you a yes/no response. I'll talk it through with you, and I'll get you to help me with the decision-making process.